The wind had a voice, and it spoke of endings. It was a low, mournful sound that swept across the plains, carrying with it the grit of 1,000 forgotten miles and the scent of dust and distant rain. It scoured the raw lumber of the train platform, moaning through the cracks in the station house where the paint had long since surrendered. The woman felt it on her face, a dry and indifferent hand. She had been sitting on the hard bench for 7 hours, a small, still figure wrapped in a dark, quilted jacket, her hands resting in her lap, her back as straight as the steel rails that vanished into the horizon. Her world had been reduced to this splintered bench and a single, camphorwood chest at her feet, its brass fittings dulled by sea salt and time. The train that had delivered her here, a great beast of smoke and iron, had snorted its impatience and departed hours ago, leaving behind a profound and ringing silence. Other passengers had disembarked, greeted by faces eager or weary, and had been swallowed by the dusty street. She remained. The photograph in her pocket, a stiff, sepia-toned lie, showed a man with a kind face and a starched collar. He was to be her husband, the final chapter in a long life of duty. But his kind face was not among those who had waited. The sun, a merciless copper coin, began its slow descent, bleeding orange and violet across the immense, empty sky. The stationmaster, a man whose patience was as thin as his hair, had spoken to her twice, his words sharp and fast, a language she did not understand but whose meaning was clear in his gestures. Go. Away. She had only nodded, her gaze unwavering, fixed on the road that led into the town of redemption. She would wait. To do anything else was to unravel. 70 years of life had taught her the discipline of stillness, the art of enduring. She had survived famine, war, and the loss of everyone she had ever known. She would survive this. The wind was her only companion, and it whispered that the day was done. A man named Arthur came to town once a month, a creature of habit as predictable as the phases of the moon. His wagon wheels groaned under the weight of flour sacks, salt blocks, and coffee beans, the necessary cargo for a life lived at the edge of things. He was a tall, spare man, his face a landscape carved by sun and solitude, his eyes the color of a winter sky. He moved with a deliberation that wasted no motion, a quiet economy that extended to his words, which he spent as if they were his last silver dollars. As he hitched his team of patient geldings to the rail outside the general store, he saw her. She was a fixture on the station platform, as unexpected and out of place as a porcelain teacup on a branding iron. He watched her from across the street as he conducted his business, his gaze returning to her between transactions for wire and nails. He saw the station master approach her again, his voice rising in frustration, his arms waving like a scarecrow in a gale. He saw the woman incline her head, a gesture of listening, not of submission. There was no fear in her posture, only a profound and weary dignity that seemed to anchor her to the bench. He saw the townspeople notice her, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves, their sideways glances sharp with suspicion and cruel curiosity. They saw a problem, an inconvenience, a stray. Arthur saw something else. He saw the set of her jaw, the straightness of her spine, the way her hands, though wrinkled and old, rested with a practiced calm. He saw a resilience that matched the hardscrabble land he called home. He finished his errands, loading his supplies with methodical care. The sun had now dipped below the horizon, and the air grew teeth. The gas lamps flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows. The platform was empty, save for her. She had not moved. She sat in the encroaching darkness, a solitary island in a sea of indifference. He untied his horses, the leather creaking in the cold air, and made a decision. It was not born of pity, but of recognition. He led the horses and wagon across the dusty street, the wheels crunching softly. The sound was loud in the evening quiet. He stopped a few feet from the platform. The woman, did not startle. She simply turned her head, her dark eyes meeting his. They were old eyes, eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind soughed around the corners of the station, the only sound between them. He was not a man for speeches. He gestured with his thumb toward the back of the wagon, an open, questioning motion. He looked at her, then at the darkening prairie that stretched out beyond the town. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, like stones rolling in a riverbed. Night's cold, it was not an invitation, but a statement of fact. She studied his face, reading the lines around his eyes, the firm set of his mouth. She had spent a lifetime learning to read men, their intentions coiled behind their words. This one was different. There was no avarice in his gaze, no sly calculation. There was only a plain and simple offer, as solid and unadorned as the man himself. He was offering shelter, not salvation. She understood the distinction. It was a language of pragmatism she knew well. She gave a single, slow nod. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but it was a decision that changed the shape of the world. Arthur accepted it with a nod of his own. He stepped onto the platform, his worn boots making a solid sound on the wood. Without a word, he lifted her small, heavy chest and placed it carefully in the wagon bed, securing it between a sack of oats and a roll of barbed wire. He offered her a hand, but she did not take it. Using the bench for support, she rose with a stiff grace and climbed onto the wagon seat herself. He did not seem offended. He seemed to understand. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, and with a soft click of his tongue, set the horses walking into the vast, gathering dark. The journey was made in silence. The rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the steady groan of the wagon wheels were a soothing percussion against the immense stillness of the plains. The lights of redemption dwindled behind them until they were just a smear of yellow against the black velvet of the earth. Above, the sky was a riot of stars, cold and brilliant and terrifyingly vast. Arthur did not speak, and did not feel the need to fill the space between them with chatter. She had known enough noise in her life. This quiet was a balm. She watched his hands on the reins, competent and sure, guiding the team along a road that was invisible to her in the darkness. He knew this land not by sight, but by feel, the way a blind woman knows the face of her child. After what felt like an eternity, a single light appeared in the distance, a lone star fallen to earth. As they drew closer, it resolved into the warm glow of a lamp in a window. The silhouette of a house and a barn rose against the star-dusted sky, stark and solitary. The structures were built for purpose, not for beauty. Arthur pulled the wagon to a halt near a water trough. He climbed down and, this time, simply waited as she lowered herself carefully to the ground. "This is it," he said, the words seeming to be pulled from him by the night air. He led her inside the house. The interior was like the man, spare, clean, and utterly functional. A main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, and a few shelves holding books and tins. The air smelled of wood smoke, leather, and coffee. There was no clutter, no sentimentality. Every object had a use. He lit another lamp, its flame pushing back the shadows. He pointed to a narrow door. "That's yours," he said. The room was small, containing only a simple cot with a neatly folded wool blanket and a small crate for a table. A single window looked out onto the endless dark. It was a room for sleeping, nothing more. When she came out, he had placed a bowl of thick, savory stew on the table. He gestured for her to sit. They ate without speaking, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against pottery. It was good food, honest and filling. When they were finished, he took the bowls to a dry sink. "Well is out back," he told her. "Woodpile is next to it." Then he nodded toward her room. Rest. He turned his back and began to bank the fire for the night. And watched him for a moment, then retreated to the small room, closing the door softly behind her. She did not feel like a guest, nor a prisoner. She felt like a piece of driftwood that had, after a long and turbulent journey, washed up on a quiet shore. She woke before the first hint of grey lightened the eastern sky. It was a habit ingrained in her bones, to rise while the world was still asleep and claim the day before it could claim her. The small room was cold, but the blanket had been thick and warm. She dressed quietly, her movements precise and economical. In the main room, Arthur was still a motionless form under a blanket on a pallet near the hearth. The fire was a bed of glowing embers. She moved past him without a sound, her soft-soled slippers whispering on the wooden floorboards. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and damp earth. She found the well, its rope and bucket solid and dependable. The water she drew was shockingly cold, and she washed her face and hands, the chill a welcome jolt that cleared the last vestiges of sleep. She located the woodpile, neatly stacked and seasoned, and carried an armload of split logs back inside, placing them carefully beside the fireplace. She did not light the fire, for that was not her place, but she made it ready. Her hands, though old, were not idle. She saw a broom leaning against the wall and swept the floor, her motions rhythmic and thorough, collecting the dust of the previous day into a neat pile. Back outside, as the sky began to blush with the coming dawn, her eye scanned the property. She was not looking for flaws, but for tasks. A loose board on the porch step, the hinge on the chicken coop that needed oiling, weeds beginning to encroach on a small, fallow vegetable garden. These were the small battles that made up a life, the constant push against decay. She found a rusty hoe leaning against the barn and began to work the soil in the garden, her back bending to the task with a familiar ache. She did not know what this place was, or what her role in it would be. But she knew work. Work was a universal language. It was a way of earning one's keep, of showing value, of saying without words, "I am not a burden." From the window, Arthur watched her. He had been awake since she first stirred, his stillness a hunter's trick. He saw her test the well rope, carry the wood, sweep the floor. Now he watched her in the growing light, a small, determined figure turning over the earth. He said nothing. He simply watched her make her place. Days bled into one another, forming a week, then two. A silent routine took root and grew, unspoken but perfectly understood. Arthur would rise and see to the livestock, his footsteps solid and sure in the pre-dawn chill. When he returned for breakfast, the fire would be lit, coffee would be hot in the pot, and Anne would have a simple meal of oatmeal or fried eggs waiting. She had found his stores and used them with a frugality that matched his own. They ate at the same table, the space between them filled not with awkwardness, but with a comfortable, shared quiet. After the meal, their paths would diverge. He would ride out to mend fences, check on his cattle, or perform the 1,000 other tasks that kept the ranch from being swallowed by the wilderness. She would claim the domestic sphere as her own. She organized his chaotic pantry, mended his work shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible, and waged a relentless, successful war on the garden weeds. She found a patch of wild herbs and began to use them in her cooking, adding subtle new flavors to their Spartan meals. Her presence softened the hard edges of his home, not with frills or decorations, but with order and care. It was a partnership forged without a contract, a negotiation conducted entirely through action. He never told her what to do, and she never asked. She simply saw what needed doing and did it. He, in turn, respected her domain, never questioning her methods. One afternoon, he returned from a trip to town and set a small, brown paper packet on the table without a word. She opened it later when he was outside. Inside were seeds. Cabbage, carrots, and a variety of Chinese melon she had not seen since she was a girl. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the packet. It was not a gift of sentiment. It was a gesture of permanence. It was an acknowledgement of the future, a future she had not dared to believe she possessed. The next morning, she was in the garden before sunrise, carefully preparing the soil, her fingers pressing the tiny seeds into the dark, receptive earth. She was planting a life. The man arrived on a Tuesday, his fancy buggy kicking up a cloud of arrogant dust that settled over the porch railings. He was dressed in a city suit that looked foolishly out of place against the backdrop of the prairie, his face fleshy and soft, his eyes small and greedy. He tied his horse carelessly and swaggered toward the house as if he owned it. This was Mr. Gable, the man from the photograph, though time and self-indulgence had distorted the kind features into a mask of petulance. And was on the porch, shelling peas into a ceramic bowl, when he appeared. She recognized him instantly, not from the picture, but from the aura of spoiled weakness that clung to him. Her hands did not stop their work. The rhythmic pop of the pea pods was the only sound. "There you are," he said, his voice a dismissive sneer. Had the whole town talking? Disappeared. Cost me the price of a train ticket. He looked around at the humble ranch, his lip curling in disdain. Ended up in a place like this. Figured you'd be trouble. He took a step toward her, his posture that of a man reclaiming a mislaid package. Come on, then. I found a place for you to work, since the wedding is off. You can earn back what you owe me. He reached for her arm. At that moment, Arthur came around the side of the barn, a length of coiled rope in one hand. He stopped when he saw the scene, his body going very still. He took in the fancy buggy, the preening man, and the way Anne had frozen, the bowl of peas still in her lap, her spine rigid. He did not raise his voice. He did not run. He simply walked forward, his boots making a slow, deliberate cadence in the dust, and placed himself between the man and the woman. Gable scowled. This your business, rancher? Arthur's gaze was flat and cold as a river stone. She's on my land. Gable laughed, a short, ugly sound. She was supposed to be my wife. A mail-order bride. She belongs to me. He looked past Arthur at Anne, his voice dripping with contempt. Tell him. You're mine. Anne's eyes met Arthur's over Gable's shoulder. She said nothing. Her silence was her answer. Arthur did not look away from Gable. The coil of rope hung loosely in his hand, a weight, not a weapon. His stillness was more menacing than any threat. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with the unspoken conflict. The vast prairie seemed to hold its breath, waiting. She belongs to no one, Arthur said, his voice quiet but carrying the finality of a closing door. And she is not for sale. Gable's face flushed a blotchy red. He was a man accustomed to getting his way through bluster and the weight of his money. He was not used to being met with an immovable object. I have a contract. A photograph. I paid her passage, he sputtered, waving a hand as if to conjure the documents from thin air. She broke our agreement by not waiting. Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. A person is not a piece of freight. The agreement was broken when you left a 70-year-old woman alone on a platform for 7 hours in a town she doesn't know. The agreement was broken when you showed up here talking about what she owes you instead of asking if she was well. Each sentence was delivered with the same low, uninflected tone, each word a carefully placed stone building a wall that Gable could not breach. Gable puffed out his chest, trying to regain his footing. You have no right. This is between me and her. He tried to step around Arthur, to get to Anne, who remained seated, watching, her hands now still in her lap. Arthur shifted his weight, a small, almost imperceptible movement that nonetheless blocked the path completely. This is my home, he said. And she is in it. That makes it my right. He took a single step forward. He did not raise his hands. He did not make a fist. He simply closed the distance, his physical presence a silent declaration. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in Gable's eyes. He saw not a simple farmer, but something ancient and unyielding, a man who was as much a part of this hard land as the rocks and the wind. Gable took a step back, then another. The bluster drained out of him, leaving behind a petty, hollow man. He threw one last hateful glare at Anne, then turned, scurried back to his buggy, and fled, his departure as undignified as his arrival. The dust from Gable's buggy settled slowly, returning the world to its quiet state. The harsh afternoon sun beat down on the empty yard. Arthur stood for a long moment, his back to Anne, watching the road until the buggy was a mere speck on the horizon. The tension seeped out of his shoulders, but he did not turn around immediately. The confrontation had been a trespass, a violation of the unspoken peace they had carefully constructed. And finally moved, setting the bowl of peas beside her on the bench. She had not been afraid for herself, but for the fragile sanctuary she had found. She had seen violence born from lesser slights. But there had been no violence, only a profound and absolute defense. When Arthur finally turned, his face was unreadable, carved from its usual stoicism. He looked at her, his gaze holding hers for a beat longer than usual. The questions hung in the air between them. Who was that man? What did he mean to you? What will you do now? But he did not ask them. And she did not offer answers that were already understood. The incident had changed something, laid a foundation bare. That evening, after their silent supper, she did not retreat to her room. Instead, she sat on the edge of the porch, looking out at the jagged line of the mountains turning purple in the twilight. After a time, Arthur came out and sat on the top step, a few feet away. For a long while, they just watched the day die. "My name," she said, her voice soft but clear in the still air, it was the first personal thing she had ever offered. He turned his head to look at her profile against the fading light. He considered the name. Peace. Quiet. It suited her. "Arthur," he replied, giving his own name in return. An exchange, equal and unforced. He looked back at the mountains. "This is your home," he said, the words a simple statement of fact. "If you want it," she did not reply immediately. She watched as the first star pricked the darkening sky. Then, she gave a single, slow nod. It was the same nod she had given him at the train station, a lifetime ago. It was all the answer he needed. The seasons turned, painting the prairie in broad strokes of ochre, then white, then a vibrant, defiant green. The seeds Anne had planted sprouted, grew strong under her patient care, and yielded a harvest that filled their small root cellar. The rhythm of their life deepened, settling into a pattern as comfortable and enduring as the flow of a river. They were two solitary people who had, by chance, found a way to be solitary together. Their partnership was etched into the land itself. He taught her how to read the sky for weather, how to tell a healthy calf from a sick one just by its posture. She taught him, without lessons, the quiet joy of a well-tended garden, the subtle comfort of a home kept with silent diligence. He would find his torn jacket mended and left neatly on his chair. She would find a sturdy new handle fitted to her favorite hoe, the wood sanded smooth to fit her hand. These were their conversations, their declarations. One winter morning, the snow fell thick and fast, burying the world in a blanket of profound silence. A section of fence in the north pasture, burdened by the heavy drifts, finally gave way. Arthur knew he had to fix it before the cattle wandered. He bundled himself against the biting wind and headed out. A few minutes later, as he struggled through the deep snow, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Anne, wrapped in a thick wool shawl, carrying a thermos of hot coffee and a small bundle of tools. She did not ask if he needed help. She simply appeared, ready to provide it. They worked for hours in the biting cold, their breath pluming in the air. He dug out the posts while she held them steady against the wind. He stretched the wire while she hammered in the staples. Their movements were synchronized, efficient, a silent dance of shared purpose. They did not speak a word. When the fence was mended, strong and taut against the snow, they stood for a moment, side by side, looking at their handiwork. The sun was beginning to set, casting a pale pink glow on the endless white landscape. He looked at her, her face chapped by the wind, her eyes clear and steady. She was not the woman he had found on the train platform. She was the woman who had built a life with him. It was a bond forged not of passion or romance, but of something far more durable, mutual respect, shared labor, and the quiet understanding that they were both, finally, home.